Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 11-19 meta for each stage of the game. We'll be covering each aspect of the meta, including stages, items, and compositions. Overall, the meta is fantastic with a lot of options. We've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Before we delve into the meta, let's do a brief overview of the 11-19 meta. After the 11-18 B patch smoothed out the rough edges of the meta, 11-19 looked to keep the trend going while adding a bit more diversity. That mostly came from the mini rework to Draven, which shunted him in the forefront of the meta. With Draven a viable carry and 3-cost champions being a bit weaker, it meant the meta shifted back towards level 7 and 8 with an emphasis on 4-cost carries. AD and auto attack carries also dominated the majority of the meta, but AP boards utilizing either Vel'Koz or Karma have continued to be viable, with Heimerdinger making rare appearances in late game camp boards. Teemo has also been a huge part of the meta towards the late game, though since he does cost health, playing Teemo as the main carry was hard to do consistently. Despite an emphasis towards the mid and late game higher cost champions, the low cost units still brought value to the meta. Hellion reroll came back with 3 viable carries, those being Kled, Ziggs, and Tristana. Kled is definitely the most common and the controversial champion of 11-19, with some players thinking there should have been a B patch, especially with Kled reroll being a common occurrence during the Set 5 Worlds Championship. Outside of Hellions, the only other playable reroll compositions were returning fan favorites Chug Jug and Vayne, neither of which were all that strong, but certainly playable in the right situation. The main downside of the meta has been a lack of 3-cost champions in the late game, though Riven, Nidalee, and Yasuo are plenty strong during stages 2, 3, and most of 4. Yasuo hasn't been completely vanished, but is far less prominent than before and requires a bit of high rolling to do well. Riven 3 is in a similar position, but Dawnbringer at least adds Karma as a secondary carry. Overall, the meta is in a great spot with plenty of options throughout the game, whether you're the type of player that favors rerolling or playing flexibly. There are some areas that could be improved in the next patch, mainly the 3-cost carry drought we're in, but nothing egregious really stands out as needing major nerfs or buffs. With that, let's start breaking down the meta, beginning with the early game and the opening carousel. The theme of flexible items continues for the mid set, as there's plenty of viable options with the majority of components. It's really down to player preference. As usual, anyone that focuses more on AD compositions than AP should look towards sword, glove, and bow as their main priority components. AP players utilize mostly rod and tier, and flex players generally open with a defensive component like chain vest or belt. Cloak, as usual, is the lowest priority. Sword is the all-around best component for generic AD items, as it builds into the trifecta of top-tier items, those being Deathblade, Giant Slayer, and Infinity Edge. All 3 of those items are fantastic choices for any AD carry, with no major difference between them, though keep in mind, Infinity Edge can struggle against Bramble Vest. Glove is usually second in priority, as it builds into Infinity Edge, Hand of Justice, and for non-Draven compositions, Last Whisper. Glove is also the best for utility items like Banshee's Claw and Shroud, both of which are staple late-game items. Bow mainly gets used for Rageblade, an item that functions well on basically all of the potential AD carries. The players can also use Bow for Runins, Last Whisper, and in the rare situations where Yasuo is viable, RFC. That covers the basic AD components and items. Let's now talk about AP. AP items are far less interesting, as the most common ones are Death Cap, Jeweled Gauntlet, Archangel Staff, and either Blue Buff or Shojin. Blue Buff is almost exclusively used on Karma, while Shojin is fine for any AP champion, including Karma. Overall, there's not much diversity for AP items, as most of the carries are going to use the same items as all the others. And then there's defensive items, which are the standard options of early game Sunfire, Warmog's Bramble Vest, and Stoneplate. Titan's Resolve sits in the middle ground between being usable both by the front line and the back line. Locket is also a viable choice for stage 2 if your game plan is to force a win streak. All in all, not much has changed regarding items. Plenty of options regardless of playstyle, and component priority mostly comes down to player preference. But the highest priority tends to go to sword, tier, bow, belt, glove, rod, and finally, chain vest, with cloak basically never being worth grabbing. Continuing in the early game, we transition into stage 1. Overall, stage 1 is all about finding pairs and upgrading champions. There's a lot of viable opening boards such as Hellions, Callista Aatrox, Dawnbringer, Sentinel Skirmisher, or just playing off an early 3-cost item holder. Basically, don't be picky unless you have a specific plan in mind. The most common and specific game plan is forcing Hellion reroll, which we don't recommend doing unless you're hitting either Ziggs 2 or Kled 2 by the end of Stage 1. It's certainly possible to play Hellion reroll without that, but to be as consistent as possible, it helps to have a good opener. Just be aware that others may contest you, so scout to see if anyone else is holding on to those champions. The goal with a Hellion opening is generally to open fort, meaning you buy the bare minimum amount of champions and aim to maximize gold gained by hitting interest levels at 10, 20, etc. Keep in mind you will lose health doing this. That ends up being okay since your economy will be quite good going into Krugs, and you should have Carousel priority throughout the early game. Next up is Stage 2, which is just a continuation of the same plan as Stage 1. Upgrade your board if possible, level at standard intervals to keep up with the lobby, and play your strongest board to win streak. Going on a loss streak is viable, but we only recommend it if you have a specific plan in mind, such as rerolling or playing for an early blessing. One of the best ways to win streak, besides slamming early items and leveling, is to play around a 3-cost item holder that you find. The 3 best are Riven, Nidalee, and Yasuo. Each of these champions is capable of holding onto items to transition into a better carry later, and all do well in Stage 2 and 3 with a board built around them. Riven does best with Dawnbringer and Legionnaire, Nidalee makes Skirmishers even stronger, and Yasuo prefers a mixture of Nightbringer and Legionnaire. For the rest of Stage 2, just aim to hit 5 on 2-5 and build up your economy for the mid-game with Stage 3. Stage 3 is where quite a few boards get stronger, but the majority of players can skip with relative ease. That said, if you're hitting level 6 on 3-2 on a multiple loss streak, you will need to roll. Continuing to lose health throughout Stage 3 after a weak Stage 2 is a fast track to ending in the bottom 4. Whether you're rolling to stabilize or just to upgrade a few champions, the goal is the same. Spend as little gold as possible by looking for specific champions and synergies. There's plenty of boards that do well at 6, like Sentinels with an early Lucian, 6 Skirmishers with Nidalee carry, 6 Hellions, Abomination, Dawnbringer, and Legionnaires. The goal when rolling is to identify what your item carry is, try to 2-star them, and add in relevant synergies if possible. Having upgraded frontliners is also key to saving health during this stage of the game. The next major milestone of Stage 3 is on 3-6 with Radiant items. Radiant items are difficult to break down because it's 5 random items every game. Mainly what players should look for is 3 things. 1. What type of composition are you looking to play? While flexible players may not be able to answer that question yet, most of the time it's obvious what you'll be playing by 3-6 based on the components you've received so far, meaning that you can round out your carry items with a Radiant item, whether that's AD or AP, just something that goes well with the direction your board is going. The second thing is identifying any weaknesses your board may have. You need a carry item? Are you lacking defense? Maybe your items are well-rounded. In that case, look for an all-around strong Radiant item like Banshees or Shroud. Whatever hole your current items have, fill it with a Radiant item. The third thing is after you've picked an item is to scout what other players have picked. Radiant items are a huge power spike, so it's crucial to know what items everyone in the lobby has. It may be the key to winning the last round of Stage 3 or may influence what you roll for in Stage 4. Regardless of how you use this information, the important part is training yourself to scout. Now we can move into Stage 4 where most players will be rolling. While the meta is favored towards the late game, finding early 4-cost champions is essential to stabilizing in Stage 4. That means the goal is not to roll all of your gold, just enough to find a few 4-cost champions, specifically your carry if possible, and trying to stabilize as much as possible. Our best tip for this stage is to not sell your current board, keep a cohesive board together if you have quite a few 2-star units, and add in new champions that fit in with what you're currently running. The goal is to stabilize, not completely pivot. Before we move into the late game, let's briefly mention the current meta compositions that have been doing well in 11-19. As we've mentioned already, the best overall reroll composition is either Kled 3 or Ziggs 3. It's a simple board to run, as most reroll compositions are. Vayne and Chug Jug are the other viable reroll boards for 1-cost champions, but we only recommend them if you have a really good opening. There's not a lot of options for 3-cost boards, but Yasuo with a Cavalier emblem is quite good. Jax is also viable with a Cavalier emblem, though outside of that situation, he is rather weak in the meta. Other 4-cost AD carries to play around are Draven with Legionnaire Knight, Lucian and 6 Sentinels, and Aphelios with Ranger Revenant. Lucian Sentinel is by far the easiest 4-cost board to run, since the Lucian one is quite a bit stronger than the other 1-star 4-cost champions. For AP boards, there's 2 main options: Vel'Koz with Abomination Spellweaver, or Karma with Dawnbringer. There's a lot of variations that you can run for those boards, but those are the most common compositions for those two carries. Heimerdinger is playable, but you need a good board to support him, and you must 2-star him, otherwise he won't scale well. We mostly only recommend Heimerdinger if you've been high rolling and can safely transition to level 9. As for the other late game options, Akshan can be used as a main carry with either Rangers or Sentinel. Kale is extremely difficult to do well with, and Teemo isn't so much a carry as he is a support unit. In general, there's not a lot of great 5-cost options for carries in the meta, the best being Akshan and occasionally Gwen. And on to the last section, the late game. The goal here is to level to 8 sometime between 4-5 and 5-3. Level 8 is key for any player running a 4-cost carry, since 2-starring them is much easier at that level. It's also where players will begin finding 5-cost champions to add to their boards. Akshan, Teemo, and Gwen are the best 5-cost champions that fit into most boards. Akshan pairs with AD boards, Teemo is great against AD boards, and Gwen will provide Mystic with a bit of AP damage. Volibear is also great to use late game, particularly with other Revenants as frontliners. There's plenty of 5-cost options in the late game, just keep in mind the majority of them are supporting units and not your carry. Next, level 9. Level 9, as usual, is improbable for the majority of players to hit each game. It's just far too expensive. That said, if you've been winning post level 8 and upgraded most of your board, then the best option is usually to level towards 9. The only other option at that point of the game is to roll for a 3-star 4-cost. This option is viable, just be sure to scout to see how contested the champion is. All in all, when it comes to the late game, it's best to focus on upgrading your board, scouting, and positioning. Positioning is the key skill to learn in the late game, as it will result in more rounds won, meaning a better overall finish. And as always, we recommend improving your early and mid games, as doing well in those stages of the game will make the late game much smoother and result in a much more consistent top 4 placement. That's all for today, folks. Patch 11.19 is one of the best we've had so far in Set 5 and has resulted in some great tournament games. We're fast approaching the end of the set, so expect the next patch to be a bit wild. Let us know in the comment section below what you're looking forward to most in Patch 11.20. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.